Today, I will tell you a story that may send a shiver down your spine with its cruelty, yet one where you will also find a beacon of justice. During the reading of $100 million will, my daughter laughed and said, "My mother only knows how to make soup." And yet, just a few minutes later, when the lawyer unexpectedly announced the hidden name at the heart of that $100 million empire, her face froze, her smile vanished, and the entire room fell into a suffocating silence. That was the moment the truth turned everything on its head. If you enjoy stories from the Grandma Life Stories series, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to share your thoughts, because what you are about to hear will leave you utterly captivated. I am Eleanor Hayes, 68 years old, an ordinary widow from Carmel by the Sea. My entire life, I stood behind my husband, first as a modest math teacher, then retiring to care for my family. I never imagined that one day I would have to stand up to the very children I brought into this world. That day, the small seaside chapel felt every cold gust of wind that rattled its stained glass windows. Light streamed down onto the casket, which was covered in a blanket of white lilies. Their heady fragrance, mingled with the smoke of candles, made the air thick and heavy. I wore an old black dress, my hand trembling as I placed a single rose on the coffin's lid. These hands, once so familiar with chalk and blackboards, hands that had cooked 1,000 meals, now shook with a loss too vast to comprehend. As everyone bowed their heads in prayer, I heard Clara's voice. My daughter wasn't crying. Her eyes were completely dry. She leaned toward her husband, Victor, and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Now everything belongs to us." I froze. The funeral wasn't even over, and she was already calculating her inheritance. Those whispers sliced through the somber air like a knife, and I felt the entire room turn ice cold. I glanced around. Family, friends, my husband's former colleagues, all had their heads bowed, murmuring prayers. They either didn't hear her cruel words, or they pretended not to. I swallowed a sigh, fighting to maintain my composure. Clara turned to look at me, her eyes shining not with tears, but with a brazen confidence bordering on arrogance. She made no attempt to hide it. Then, right in front of our relatives, she declared, her words sharp and clear, "My mother is just a housewife. My father built a $100 million empire, and my mother, she just makes soup." I heard every word as if it were being hammered onto the cold stone floor. An indescribable pain rose within me. It wasn't the disrespect that hurt most, but the fact that the child I had once cherished could be so heartless. I remembered the nights Clara had a high fever, how I sat by her bed all night, pressing cool cloths to her forehead and whispering lullabies until she slept. Now, that same child was negating everything I had ever done. Victor smirked. Tom, my youngest son, kept his head bowed, not daring to speak. Their silence made me feel utterly abandoned in the middle of my own husband's funeral. I clenched my thin hands. My white-knuckled fingers seemed to be telling me, "Stay strong." I lifted my head and looked straight at the casket. In my heart, I whispered to the man I had lost, "Rest in peace. They think all I know is how to make soup. But the truth, it won't stay buried forever." The church bells began to toll, their long, resonant chimes like a premonition of the storm to come. I took a deep breath and walked out of the chapel. Behind me, the steady click-clack of Clara's high heels on the stone floor echoed like a challenge. I knew, from that moment on, my family would never know peace again. The funeral had barely ended, the last of the guests yet to depart, when my seaside home was transformed into a marketplace where my life's possessions were being divvied up. Clara made no attempt to be discreet. She dragged Victor and Tom through the living room, a stack of brightly colored neon sticky notes in her hand. With every stop she made, a note was slapped onto an item that held a lifetime of my memories. Victor pointed a finger at the Steinway piano, an instrument my husband had saved for years to afford. "This one goes in our living room," he announced grandly. "It'll fit the space perfectly." Clara immediately stuck a glaring yellow note on it, the word "mine" scrawled across it. I watched from a distance, a knot tightening in my chest. That piano had witnessed countless evenings where my husband played just for me. Now it was being claimed like a spoil of war. They didn't stop. Victor tapped the gray Italian sofa. "We'll take this. We can turn this corner into a wine cellar." His tone was as confident as if he were already the master of the house. Clara let out a loud laugh, while Tom stood by silently, his head bowed as he followed them. A blue note was slapped onto the back of the sofa, erasing every memory I cherished. I wanted to speak, but my throat was tight. I knew any word I uttered would be met with ridicule. I wrung my hands, a chill running down my frail arms. People were still in their mourning clothes, yet my home was filled with the boisterous laughter of vultures picking over a carcass. They moved toward the silver cabinet where I kept the silverware set inherited from my mother. Clara pointed. "This is for Catherine's apartment. She'll love it." Victor swiftly stuck a note on it, not bothering to ask. As I watched the light glint off each silver spoon, I remembered all the family dinners we'd shared, and my eyes began to sting. "Ta." Clara turned to Tom, her smile sharp. "You'd better pick what you want before Mother gives it all away to someone." Tom stammered, I don't need anything. You decide, Clara." His words were another blade twisting in my heart. My youngest son didn't dare defend me, just stood by and let it all happen. I was pushed back into the kitchen. They pointed me to an old, wobbly wooden chair in the corner. In front of me was a plate of cold food, a few pieces of dried-out chicken, and some mushy potatoes. No one asked if I had eaten. No one even glanced my way. Clara's voice was a command. "Sit here for now, Mom. It's too noisy in the living room." I sat down, my back against the wall, the chair creaking with my every movement. The smell of cold grease hung in the air, mingling with the chill from the window. From the living room, I could hear their laughter and their excited chatter about renovations, paint colors, and throwing out old things. I heard Victor say, "We should knock down the east-facing room and build a home theater. No need to keep all this outdated stuff." Clara agreed instantly, as if she were the rightful owner. I picked up the dry piece of chicken. It was hard and tasteless, less like food and more like a discarded memory. I forced myself to swallow, determined not to let them see me tremble. Through the crack of the door, I watched Clara stick more neon notes on the liquor cabinet, on the oil painting my husband had bought from a young artist, and even on the grandfather clock he had painstakingly fixed every time it broke. Each sticky note was a pair of scissors, snipping away at the fabric of my memories. They left me no space. Then Clara's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mother has lived in this house for far too long. Once the paperwork is settled, she can move down to the storeroom. It's much quieter there." The group laughed. Victor added, "The storeroom is spacious enough. Just a small bed will do." His laughter lingered, a mocking echo. Tom remained silent, not a single word of protest. I sat there, my back against the cold kitchen wall, listening as their words pierced my skin like needles. But deep inside me, humiliation was slowly transforming into something else. A clarity, a small, smoldering fire. I could not let them continue to believe I was an invisible shadow, a woman who only knew how to make soup. A cousin walked past me without a second glance. He jerked his chin toward the garage. "There's a bottle of water in the garage fridge. Go get it, Aunt Eleanor." I sat still, not responding. In their eyes, I was nothing more than an old housemaid. The house echoed with the sound of dragging suitcases, laughter, and the rustle of sticky notes. No one paid me any mind, but I knew every word they said, every action they took, I would remember, because my silence was not acceptance, it was preparation. I slowly slipped my hand into my coat pocket, my fingers brushing against the edge of an old, worn file. The paper was frayed, but the blue ink on it was still perfectly intact. I closed my eyes, listening to the sea breeze whistle from outside, whispering something in my ear that sounded like an affirmation. The time for the truth will come. I opened my eyes and looked around the cold kitchen. In Clara's laughter, in Victor's nod, in Tom's weak silence, I saw clearly who was on my side, who was against me, and who would simply abandon me. This house, once my home, had become a battlefield. But I knew this war had only just begun. I sat quietly in the kitchen, listening to the sound of Clara and Victor's voices echoing from the living room. The neon notes continued to be slapped onto every piece of furniture. Each peal of their laughter was like salt in my wounds. But it was during that long evening that I began to understand why my daughter and her husband had become so cruel. Clara stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, her eyes gleaming like someone who had just secured a great victory. She scanned the house and declared with immense pride, "Everything Dad left behind must belong to me. I am the only one who deserves it. No one but me can run Hayes & Co." Her voice was resolute, without a hint of hesitation. Victor nodded, patting his wife's back. "That's right. You've been carrying the company for years. Without you, it would have collapsed long ago. She knows nothing about business. Don't let her get in the way." I heard every word land like a hammer blow. Clara was obsessed with recognition, convinced that only she had the ability to carry on the legacy. I saw it clearly. The daughter I had raised was being consumed by her own ambition. She no longer needed love. She needed power and glory. Tom stood huddled in a corner, silent. Clara turned to him, her voice sharp as ice. "You're too weak. If the company fell into your hands, it would be bankrupt in months. You don't even know how to sign a contract, so what could you possibly protect?" Tom bowed his head, not daring to respond. Victor added, "The boy is better suited to being a shadow, Clara. Don't expect anything from him." Tom mumbled, "Do whatever you want. I don't want to be involved." His words confirmed that he had surrendered, leaving his sister and brother-in-law to decide everything. I looked at my son, my heart heavy. He wasn't evil, but his weakness was a knife in my back. Victor leaned back in his chair, pulled a small stack of papers from his jacket, glanced at them quickly, then hid them away. I caught that fleeting moment and the furtive look in his eyes. Only later did I learn that he was drowning in debt from failed real estate investments. The lavish house he lived in was merely a facade. In reality, the bank was knocking at his door. He needed money, a lot of it, and my family's inheritance was his only lifeline. Victor lowered his voice, but it was still loud enough for me to hear. "We have no choice, Clara. If we don't get all the assets, I'll lose everything. We'll be left with nothing." Clara's reply was immediate. "I won't let that happen. The company is mine. This house must be mine too. Mother will have no place in this empire." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I understood now. To Clara, I was a shadow of her own inadequacy. She believed that because I stayed home and made soup, I had no right to a voice. She needed to eliminate me to validate herself. To Victor, I was an obstacle preventing him from paying his debts. And to Tom, I was no longer an anchor because he wasn't strong enough to stand by my side. Clara continued, her voice steely. "Tomorrow, we'll call the designers. I want this house completely transformed. Tear out all the old things Mother has kept. Father built this empire, and now I will make it mine. I can't let people think I'm just some ungrateful heiress." Victor sneered. "And you won't be an heiress. You'll be the owner. As for her, let her move to the storeroom. Let her know what it feels like to be cut out of the game." Tom shook his head slightly, but said nothing more. Clara spun around and looked directly at her younger brother. "If you dare side with her, don't expect a place in the company. What's your choice, Tom? A secure future with me, or sitting in the kitchen eating soup with Mother?" Tom's voice trembled. I don't choose. I'll do as you say." That answer made Clara smile triumphantly. Victor clapped Tom on the shoulder with arrogant satisfaction. I looked at the three of them, a daughter blinded by ambition, a son-in-law desperate from debt, and my own son, too weak to even lift his head. I sat still, my heart aching, but my mind was becoming clearer. I was no longer just the mother who made soup, as they believed. I had made calculations, kept important documents, and silently shouldered the burden when the company was on the brink of collapse. I knew the time would come for me to show them the truth. Clara walked past me, her gaze cold, as if I no longer existed in this house. She whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You should start preparing, Mother. When the will is read, it will all be over. Don't expect a share in this $100 million empire." I looked up at my daughter and said nothing. In my eyes, there were no longer just tears, but the beginning of a different light. A light of resolve, of the unwavering belief that all cruel words would eventually have their price. That night, I lay in the cold kitchen, listening to the sea wind howl through the cracks in the door. I knew that every word, every glance, every motive they had revealed was now etched into my mind. And I also knew that the day the truth would be revealed was drawing near. Clara flopped onto the leather sofa in the living room, crossing her legs and swirling a glass of red wine. She surveyed the room as if inspecting a property soon to be hers. Then she turned to me, her voice sharp and deliberate. "You know, Mother, Father built a $100 million empire. You, on the other hand, just made soup. Don't dream of anything else." Every word was a dagger, twisting in my chest. No one objected. No one defended me. Victor sat beside her, a victorious smirk on his lips. Tom just stared at the floor, his eyes avoiding mine, his hands clenched, but silent. I sat quietly on the wobbly wooden chair in the kitchen corner, a cold draft seeping through the door behind me. I didn't react, nor did I burst into tears as they might have expected. Instead, I slowly reached into my coat pocket. My fingers touched the familiar, worn leather of the file. It had been with me for so many years, a living secret that no one suspected. I felt the stiff edge of the paper against my fingertips. Inside was the preferred stock agreement from 2003, the very document that had saved the company from bankruptcy. Back then, Hayes & Company was on the verge of collapse, the banks calling daily. I had secretly sold all my jewelry, the emerald necklace my mother left me, my gold wedding band engraved with our initials, the earrings I wore on my wedding day. It all became a number on a bank contract, and that money bought back the trust of the investors. No one knew, not even Clara. She only saw her father on the podium at the signing ceremony, hailed as a genius who had turned the tide. But the person behind the scenes, the one who quietly bore the loss to save the company, was dismissed with a simple phrase, "She just makes soup." I closed my eyes, remembering that rainy night so many years ago. My husband sat in his study, his hands trembling, beads of sweat on his forehead. He told me everything was about to be lost. I didn't ask questions. I just walked quietly into the bedroom and opened an old wooden box. The desk lamp cast a glow on the jewelry I had cherished. I wrapped them up and sold them the next morning. And then, with that money, I signed the preferred stock agreement. I signed it in blue ink, not black. I knew even then that small detail would one day be important. Alongside that agreement, I kept the business plan I had written myself. The pages were filled with numbers, scribbled notes, and market forecasts I had researched for long nights in the library. When he was too exhausted and slumped over his desk, I quietly continued his work. I never needed my name on any official document. I just needed the company to survive so my family wouldn't lose everything. And now, as Clara stood before me, mocking me for only knowing how to make soup, my hand tightened around the file in my pocket. I knew my weapon wasn't arguments or tears. My weapon was the truth, recorded on every one of those pages. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Clara. I didn't answer her taunt. I let my silence be a mirror, reflecting back the hollowness of her own arrogance echoing through the house. Victor set his wineglass down, a faint sneer on his lips. "Your silence is an admission. You have nothing but a few old trinkets. Tomorrow we start renovating this house. I'll have the contractors come and take measurements." Clara laughed loudly. "That's right. You just sit there, Mother. We'll handle all the decisions." Tom spoke up softly, his voice trembling. "Clara, maybe we should let Mom keep a few mementos." But Clara cut him off, her voice like a razor. "Shut up. You've always been weak. Stay out of this." Tom immediately fell silent, the light in his eyes extinguished. I looked at my son and saw the fear that bound him. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I knew I had to remain calm. This was not the time to unveil my secret. I needed to wait. to let them believe I was completely defeated. Only then, when the truth was revealed, would the sound of their downfall be louder than any protest I could ever make. My hand in my pocket touched the corner of the file once more. I felt a wave of resolve spread through me. Everything Clara was doing, every insult Victor hurled, would soon be overturned, because no one could erase the fact that I had laid the cornerstone of the very empire they so desperately wanted to claim. Clara turned and glanced at me. She mistook my silence for submission. She said it one last time, as if sealing my fate. "You are just a shadow in this house, Mother. All your life you've made soup, and soon your only place will be in the storeroom." I looked straight at her, unblinking. In my eyes there was no longer the shadow of a weak woman. I didn't need to say a word, because I knew that time was on my side. And in my coat pocket, the truth was ready, waiting for its day in the sun. That afternoon, while the house was still a chaotic mess of neon sticky notes, Victor entered the kitchen. He wasn't carrying a wine glass or wearing his usual arrogant smirk. In his hands was a neat file, bound in a black leather cover. His eyes were cold and sharp, like a banker coming to collect a debt. Clara followed, her blonde hair tied back high, the heels of her shoes clicking decisively on the floor. She slammed a fountain pen down on the old dining table where I was sitting. Her voice was a command. "Sign it, Mother. It's just a formality." I looked down at the file. The cover read, "Bank Confirmation Letter," in block capitals. At the bottom was a blank signature line, waiting for me. I didn't touch it. I just lifted my head and looked directly at Victor. He forced a smile, but his eyes were filled with urgency. "Once you sign, the funds can be released. We're settling some of the company's debts. This is just a confirmation for the bank that everyone in the family is in agreement. It's nothing major." I heard every word. Bank, debts, agreement. The words rang in my head like an alarm bell. I quietly opened the file, my eyes scanning the lines quickly. It wasn't a confirmation, as he claimed. Every sentence, every word, was carefully crafted. I, Eleanor Hayes, voluntarily relinquish all inheritance rights and agree to transfer my share of the assets to the other heirs. Clara pushed the file closer to me, her tone dismissive. "Just sign it, Mother. It's not like you'd know what to do with it anyway. Dad did everything. This company has nothing to do with you. This is just a formality." I looked at her, my gaze calm, without a trace of the trembling she expected. I picked up the file and turned to the last page. Every bolded word was a trap. They thought I was old, my eyes failing, that I would believe their explanation. A small smile touched my lips. I set the file down on the table and gently pushed it back toward Clara. My voice was low and clear. "Do you think I can't read?" The air froze. Clara blinked, her face flushing a deep red. Victor tried to maintain his composure, but his hand unconsciously gripped the edge of his chair. Tom stood in the doorway, watching silently, his face a mask of confusion. Clara broke the silence with a short, dry laugh. "You're always so suspicious, Mother. We're just trying to get things settled quickly. Why do you have to make things difficult?" I kept my voice even. "Make things difficult? Handing me a paper that makes me sign away everything? You call that settling things?" I paused, looking my daughter straight in the eye. "Settling things for whom?" Victor interjected, his voice low, trying to be persuasive. "Listen, you won't lose anything. We will take care of you. All your expenses, all your needs will be met. You don't have to worry." I looked at him and answered flatly, "I have lived long enough to know that when someone tells you don't worry, that is precisely the time you need to worry the most." Tom's voice trembled as he spoke up. "Clara, Victor, I don't think we should force Mom like this." But Clara instantly turned on him. "Shut up. You never understand anything. Stay out of this." Tom bowed his head again, his voice choked. I just don't want things to be so tense." Clara moved closer, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't act like you're smarter than everyone else, Mother. You'll have to sign this paper sooner or later. It's useless to resist." I sat still, Leaning back in my chair, my hands resting lightly on the table, my voice dropped, becoming steelier than ever. You're mistaken. I may have been silent my whole life, but silence does not mean ignorance. Try to remember, when the company almost went bankrupt in 2003, who was it that came up with the plan to save it? Was it your father, or was it someone else? Clara froze, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Victor quickly jumped in. Don't listen to her reminisce about the past. We need to focus on the present. I tilted my head, my eyes never leaving Clara. I don't need to sign any papers. And if you truly believe I would so easily put my name to a document that would strip me of everything, then you don't know me at all. The tension in the room was palpable. Clara bit her lip, clutching the pen in her hand, her face crimson with rage. She swallowed her anger, but her voice was still tight. Fine, you'll see. Victor slammed the file shut, the sound sharp and dry in the quiet kitchen. He stood up, his eyes blazing. You just missed your last chance to do this voluntarily. Don't blame us when things get much harder. I watched them leave, my heart no longer trembling. I knew I had just escaped a vicious trap, a trap disguised as a bank paper, but one that could have stolen everything with a single signature. I gently touched my coat pocket, where the old leather file still lay. I knew the battle had only just begun, and this time I would not back down. Night fell over Carmel by the sea. The wind howled through the small alleys, carrying the salt of the sea and a biting chill. I put on my old wool coat, my hand clutching the file in my pocket. My heart beat slow and steady. After the bank paper trap that afternoon, I knew that if I hesitated any longer, I would be pushed out of everything. It was time to act. I drove my old car to the center of town. Margaret Pierce's law office was on the second floor of a red brick building, its brass sign reflecting the pale yellow streetlights. I knocked 3 times. The door opened to reveal Margaret, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I had a feeling you would come." I stepped inside. The office smelled of old paper and herbal tea. The warm yellow light made everything feel both cozy and serious. Law degrees and professional awards hung on the walls, inspiring confidence. Margaret led me to her desk and sat opposite me. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice even but firm. "Clara and Victor have already started the process to transfer the assets. If you don't have proof, they will win." I placed a trembling hand over my coat pocket. "I brought it," I whispered, "but I need you to confirm it." Margaret nodded slightly, then walked to a large safe in the corner of the room. She turned the dial, the metallic clicks echoing in the silent office. I held my breath. The safe door swung open, and Margaret retrieved a thick file bound in old brown leather. She placed it on the desk and opened it. I immediately recognized the familiar text. Preferred Stock Agreement, 2003. My heart tightened. The original. Not a copy, not a story. This was the legal document, bearing the bank's official seal, my signature, and clauses no one in my family ever knew existed. Margaret pointed to Section 3, her voice confident. "The amount is clearly stated, $50,000, sourced from your personal assets, specifically your jewelry. In return, you received 15% in preferred shares of Hayes & Company. This is legally binding. No one can dispute it." I remembered that rainy night again. The image of me wrapping my emerald necklace, my wedding band, my earrings to be sold flashed before my eyes. At the time, my only thought was simple. Save the company, save my husband and my children. I never told Clara or Tom. To them, I was just the woman who made soup, the silent figure in the house. I whispered, "They think I can't read. They think I know nothing. But this is the truth." Margaret looked up, a steely glint in her eyes. "Yes, this is the leash that will bind Clara and Victor. The more aggressive they get, the calmer you must be. At the will reading, I will present this document before all the relatives and legal representatives. Trust me, they will be stunned into silence." I looked her directly in the eye, my voice low. "Margaret, you understand, don't you? I'm not doing this just for the money. I want them to know that life isn't all about ambition and contempt. I want them to taste the truth." Margaret nodded, pushing the file toward me. "Eleanor, you have been silent for long enough. This is your legal weapon, and it cannot be denied. You can win this, and you will." I gently placed my hand on the pages, feeling the weight of a lifetime. So many years of silence, so many cruel words, all of it now contained in a few faded documents. Margaret continued, "I will keep the original in this safe. You hold on to the copy I've prepared. If anything happens, we'll still have evidence. But remember, it's not yet time to reveal it. Let them believe they've already won. That will make the final blow all the more devastating." I pressed my lips together and nodded. She was right. I had to let Clara and Victor believe they had pushed me into a corner. Only then, when the truth was revealed, would their humiliation be absolute. I stood up and adjusted my coat. Margaret walked me to the door, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Eleanor," she said, her voice warm but resolute, "you were never just the wife behind the man. You were the one who kept this entire empire from crumbling, and now you must let them see it." I walked down the narrow staircase, the sea wind hitting my face. I clutched the copy Margaret had given me. I knew this wasn't just paper. This was the truth. This was justice. This was the testament to a lifetime of sacrifice buried under the words, "Just make soup." Tonight, I had my weapon, and I swore I would not let it go to waste. I noticed Clara started looking at me differently. Her gaze was no longer one of casual contempt. It was probing, sharp, and filled with suspicion. Perhaps my calmness was unnerving her. A woman accustomed to controlling everything was now faced with my lack of reaction to her bullying, and it surely planted a seed of unease within her. That afternoon, as I sat quietly in the kitchen drinking tea, Clara walked by with a synthetic smile. "You've been so calm lately, Mother. Aren't you worried about the house, the assets, your future?" She drew out her words as if testing the waters. I set my teacup down and replied softly, "There's nothing to worry about. What is mine will always be mine." That answer made Clara frown. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, I heard furtive footsteps in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't turn on the light. I knew Clara couldn't rest with her mind full of doubt. My door creaked open, a shadow slipped inside. A thin beam from a flashlight swept across the room. I narrowed my eyes, feigning deep sleep. Clara began to search, the dresser drawers, the desk, even the old suitcase under my bed. The sound of rustling was incessant. "There has to be something," I heard her whisper to herself. "There's no way she'd be this calm." She opened my wardrobe, rummaged through my clothes, overturned my pillows, and even checked inside my old shoes. But all she found were simple things: a few old dresses, woolen scarves, the Bible I read every night. There was no file, no evidence for her to seize upon. Frustrated, she shone the flashlight on my nightstand. On it was a silver frame holding my wedding photo, slightly tarnished with time. Clara picked it up, turning it over and over. The light glinted off the engraved script on the silver border. Hayes, 1975. I heard her grind her teeth. She whispered, her voice filled with venom. "She's hiding something, and it has to be about the company. There's no way she could remain so composed if she had nothing." She put the frame down carelessly, leaving it askew. A cold determination flashed in her eyes. "You think you can hide it forever, Mother? I will find it. I will tear this entire house apart, and when I discover your secret, it will all be over." I shifted slightly, pretending to turn in my sleep. Clara immediately switched off the flashlight, stood motionless for a few seconds, then silently retreated. The door closed, leaving the room in darkness, but I could still hear the loud thumping of my own heart. In the dark, I reached out and touched my coat, which was hanging on a chair beside the bed. The real file was still there, safe, and Clara had no idea. The greater her anxiety grew, the more my own confidence solidified. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house had changed. Clara spoke less, but her eyes darted everywhere, like a predator stalking its prey. Victor feigned nonchalance, but I could tell he sensed the tension from his wife. Tom just kept his head down, avoiding all conversation. At breakfast, Clara deliberately made a veiled comment. Some people think that silence will keep them safe, but the truth always has a way of coming out. I lifted my spoon of soup and replied succinctly, "You're right. The truth never disappears." The table fell silent for a moment. I saw a flash of hatred in Clara's eyes, but it was mixed with fear. She no longer saw me as harmless. Now, in her eyes, I was a dangerous unknown, and I knew that once Clara smelled something was amiss, she would not stop. From that day on, Clara became a hunter in her own home. She would walk past me, but her gaze never left me, as if she wanted to rip open my clothes, tear apart my drawers, and expose what I had hidden. I smiled faintly to myself. The more she craved it, the sharper my final blow would be. The large kitchen, once the warmest room in the house, now felt like a battlefield. That evening, Clara herself arranged the seating for dinner. I was relegated to the end of the table, next to the wobbly chair usually reserved for passing guests. The yellow light shone down on the long dining table, laden with roast beef, mashed potatoes, and red wine. But I knew this meal wasn't for sharing. It was for show. Clara sat in the center, pouring a full glass of wine for Victor. Tom sat quietly on the other side, his shoulders slumped. The air was thick with tension. I tried to remain calm, taking a spoonful of soup from the small pot I had prepared for myself, the only dish on the table no one else touched. Clara raised her glass, a faint sneer on her lips. "Well, here's to Father's great legacy. He built an entire empire. $100 million. Sounds impressive, doesn't it?" She glanced at me, her smile as sharp as a knife. "And Mother, what did you build? Oh, that's right. You built soup." Victor let out a snort of laughter. "You're right, Clara. An empire and a soup pot. Two different worlds indeed." Tom sat silently, his head bowed over his plate. I saw his shoulders tremble slightly, but he didn't say a word. Fear had paralyzed him, and his silence was another dagger in my heart. I set my spoon down, the clatter on the wooden table sharp and deliberate. It made everyone pause. I lifted my head, my voice calm but laced with ice. "Soup is what kept you alive to see this day." The table froze. Clara frowned, Victor raised a mocking eyebrow, and Tom glanced up for a fleeting second before looking down again. Clara leaned forward, her eyes challenging. "Are you trying to take credit now, Mother? A bit of broth, a few potatoes? That's not building anything. Father was the one who bled on the battlefield of business while you stayed in the kitchen. People remember him. No one remembers you." I looked my daughter straight in the eye, my gaze steady and unwavering. "Clara, do you remember the days when your father was on the verge of bankruptcy? Who skipped meals, sold every piece of jewelry, every family heirloom, just so you could still go to school in decent clothes? Who stood in this kitchen, exhausted, and still made soup so this family wouldn't go hungry? What do you call that, if not a foundation?" Victor interjected, his voice thick with wine. "That's enough, Eleanor. Stop bragging. Your time is over. This future belongs to us." I tilted my head, my voice low but sharp. "You think a future built on lies and greed can stand firm?" The air grew heavy. Clara pressed her lips together, her hands gripping her wine glass. She lowered her voice, almost hissing through her teeth. "You're hiding something. You think you're so clever, don't you? You have nothing left but a few useless complaints. When that will is read, you'll be left with nothing." I smiled faintly, not a mocking smile, but a calm one. "If you truly believe that, then why do you scrutinize my every move? A strong person doesn't need to fear an old woman at the end of the table." Victor slammed his hand on the table, the wine in his glass sloshing. "Just ignore her, Clara. Don't waste your time on this nonsense." But his eyes darted away, as if he too was unsettled. Tom then whispered, his voice trembling, "Maybe. Mom is right." The entire table turned to him. Clara glared, and Victor gritted his teeth. Tom immediately bowed his head, falling silent as if he had just committed a grave sin. But I heard him, and I saw the flicker of guilt in my son's eyes. I placed my hands on the table, my voice deepening. "You can look down on me, but never forget that without a foundation, an empire will collapse in a single storm." A wave of silence washed over them. Clara turned her face away, but her hand was clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Victor poured more wine and drank it down, as if to drown the tremor in his heart. As for me, I knew this was just the beginning. Clara could mock me with her cruel words, but every word I spoke had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. From now on, my every calm smile would give her sleepless nights. I took another spoonful of soup, my voice soft but resonant in the silent room. "Soup kept you alive, and justice will preserve the truth." The table was silent, save for the sound of my spoon against the bowl, like the steady beat of a war that had already begun. 3 days after that humiliating dinner, I received a call from Margaret. Her voice was low but firm. "The official will reading is set for this Friday at my office. Eleanor, you must be prepared. This will be the decisive moment." I clutched the phone, my eyes gazing out at the withered garden beyond the window. The sea wind whistled through the wooden fence, carrying a cold, salty sting. I replied succinctly, "I'm ready." Inside the house, the atmosphere was bustling in a different way. Clara and Victor sat together in the living room, their voices echoing down the hall. I paused by the door to listen. Victor lowered his voice. "Once the will is read, she'll have nothing. We just have to stand our ground and everything will be ours." Clara's lips curled into a smirk, her faint laugh spreading through the room. "I told you, she's nothing but a wife. Father built $100 million empire. And her? All she did was make soup and stand in his shadow. People like that have no place in a will." Victor nodded, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the glass coffee table. "We should prepare a statement. We need to appear legitimate in front of the lawyer. Tom is no threat. He'll just bow his head and obey. But her, I have a feeling she's hiding something." Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice a hiss. "Hiding what? What has she ever known besides the kitchen? Don't let that calm facade fool you. It's just a mask for her powerlessness." I heard every word, and a fire burned within me. All those years of sacrifice, now reduced to the words wife and soup. But instead of anger, I took a deep breath, keeping my heart steady. The real storm had not yet arrived, and I knew the truth in my hands would turn Clara's words to ash. That night, I sat alone in my room, the yellow desk lamp illuminating the official notice Margaret had sent. The court's announcement of the will reading. The line, "Eleanor Hayes, potential legal heir," was right at the top of the page. I gently traced the words, as if touching a faith that was returning after years of being buried. I thought of my husband, of the days he came home exhausted from work, never allowing me to step into the light. I thought of the pages of the business plan I had written in the kitchen, my hands still smelling of garlic and onions. He knew what I did, but he chose to remain silent. Now that silence was about to be broken. The next day, Clara walked into the dining room where I was drinking tea. She crossed her arms, her gaze as sharp as a knife. "Do you know what Friday is, Mother?" I looked up calmly. "The day of the will reading," she scoffed. "Correct. And it's also the day you'll be cast out. No name in the ledger, no say in the decisions, nothing left. You should prepare yourself." I set my teacup down, my voice steady. "Are you so certain, Clara, that I will have nothing?" Clara moved closer, leaned down and whispered, her voice like a blade at my throat. "I am certain, because you are just a wife, a person in the background, and people like that are easily forgotten." I looked my daughter straight in the eye, unblinking. "You're in for a surprise." Clara froze for a moment, then turned away, tossing her long hair back with an air of arrogance. But I could see, lingering in her eyes, a trace of uncertainty. As Friday approached, the entire house seemed to be caught in the eye of a storm. Clara and Victor prepared, planning every step to humiliate me. Tom grew quieter each day, his gaze evasive, but I saw something in it I recognized, the first crack in his conscience. As for me, every night before I slept, I touched the copy of the file Margaret held. Each page reminded me, the truth cannot be erased. I had waited too long for this moment, and when the clock struck on Friday, I knew this entire house would never be the same again. On Friday morning, I sat in the car that took me to San Francisco. The road hugged the cliffside, the wind whipping fiercely as waves crashed white against the base of the bridge. The trembling in my heart was gone, replaced by a strange tranquility, as if I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. The conference room where the will was to be read was on a high floor of a sleek glass skyscraper overlooking a misty San Francisco bay. Inside, leather chairs were arranged in rows, and a long oak table gleamed under warm yellow lights. But no one felt warm. The air was thick, on the verge of exploding. Clara entered first, her high heels striking the floor like a declaration of war. She took a seat at the head of the table, crossed her arms, and a smirk played on her lips as she muttered, "Watch her crumble." Her voice was deliberately loud enough for me to hear. Victor followed, carrying a leather briefcase, his eyes full of confidence. He sat next to his wife, leaning in to whisper, though his words carried to me, "In a little while, you won't have a place in this family anymore." Tom entered last, looking tired, his back slightly stooped. The son who once ran to me for a hug whenever he fell, now sat in silence, his head bowed, not daring to meet my eyes. I sighed softly, but I didn't blame him. His weakness only strengthened my resolve. Margaret entered, a thick file in her arms. She wore a pale gray suit, her eyes as sharp as a scalpel. The moment she placed the file on the table, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Clara was the first to break the silence. She leaned back in her chair, her voice shrill. "Ms. Pierce, I imagine this will be quick. My mother, her name won't be in there. My father made it clear to us. The inheritance belongs to those who know how to build, not those who just potter around in a kitchen." Victor added confidently, "We just need the formalities, no need to drag this out. Let's get on with it." Margaret didn't reply immediately. She adjusted her glasses and slowly opened the file. I saw Clara's fingers tapping impatiently on the table, the sound echoing in the room. I sat at the far end of the table, my hand resting on my coat pocket. Inside, the copy of the 2003 agreement remained, like a smoldering ember. I sat in silence, my gaze calmly fixed on the tabletop, letting Clara and Victor believe they had already won. Clara turned to Tom, her taunt deliberate. "Look at Mother, Tom. She actually thinks her name will be mentioned. How pathetic. Still delusional after all this time." Tom said nothing, his hands twisting together under the table. I saw him tremble slightly. Margaret's voice finally cut through the tension, clear and resonant. "As required by the court, we will now proceed with the reading of the final legal will and testament of Mr. Richard Hayes." The room hushed. Clara sat up straighter, her eyes alight with greed. Victor flashed a cold smile, his fingers adjusting his tie. I remained still, my heart as calm as the water before a storm. Clara suddenly interjected, her tone defiant. "Before you begin, I just want to make it clear for the record. My mother, her name is not on any documents. All she ever did was make soup, and making soup doesn't build an empire." The room was silent for a second. I lifted my head, my eyes meeting Clara's directly. Without raising my voice, I said softly, "Don't be so certain." Victor let out a laugh, a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the room. More empty threats. Margaret did not let them continue. She placed a hand on the file, her gaze sweeping over each of them. Her voice was firm. "If you are all ready, we will begin." All eyes were fixed on the file on the table. Clara bit her lip, her hand gripping a glass of water so tightly I thought it might shatter. Victor leaned back, but his eyes were glued to Margaret's lips, waiting. As for me, I sat still, my hands in my lap. I could hear the beat of my own heart, but it wasn't a rhythm of fear. It was the drumbeat of a truth that was about to arrive. The elegant room, the yellow lights, the sound of wind whistling past the tall glass windows, everything felt suffocating, like a rope being pulled taut to its breaking point. And I knew that as soon as Margaret uttered those first few words, that rope would snap, leaving behind a stunned, deafening silence. Margaret slowly opened the file, the rustle of paper sounding like a blade slicing through the tense atmosphere. All eyes were fixed on her. Clara sat straight, a confident smirk on her lips. Victor crossed his arms, his face smug. Tom remained with his head bowed, his hands clasped together. And I sat at the end of the table, my hands resting on my lap, silent. Margaret lifted her head, her voice resonating clear and decisive in the polished oak room. Pursuant to a legally binding and fully notarized agreement executed in 2003, 52% of the shares in Hayes & Company belonged to Eleanor Hayes. An absolute silence fell over the room. It was as if all sound had been vacuumed out, leaving only the soft ticking of the wall clock. Clara froze. Her face, once a mask of arrogance, was now ashen. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Victor was the first to shatter the silence, his voice a shrill cry. "Impossible! This is a forgery, a complete fabrication." Margaret remained unfazed. She pulled another file from her briefcase, this one bound in old, worn leather. She slammed it down on the table, the sharp thud making Victor flinch. "This is the original, bearing the official seal of the First Savings Bank of California, along with the notary's signature from April 2003. Everything is legal and irrefutable." I could see beads of sweat forming on Victor's temples. He tried to force a laugh, but his voice cracked. She couldn't have done that. A woman who spent her life in the kitchen, what does she know about shares, about a company?" Margaret cut him off, her voice like steel. "I would advise you to choose your words carefully, Mr. Victor, because it was the money from the sale of Mrs. Hayes's personal jewelry that saved this company from bankruptcy that year. That money was exchanged for preferred stock ownership, and today that clause remains in full effect." Clara finally found her voice. She slammed her hands on the table, her fingernails scraping against the wood. "No, this is a conspiracy! Mother, you orchestrated this to steal Father's work!" I lifted my head and looked directly at my daughter. My voice was calm, but as sharp as a scalpel. "Clara, you call the sacrifice that kept a roof over your head, that allowed you to get a full education, an orchestration?" Clara bit her lip, her eyes flashing with hatred. But the truth laid bare before her left her speechless. Victor, still trying to salvage the situation, pointed a trembling finger at me. "I don't believe it. She hid this for years and now concocts this story to take everything. This isn't fair." Margaret opened another document, pulling out an envelope sealed with red wax. She held it up for all to see. "This is a letter of confirmation from Mr. Richard Hayes himself, signed on the same day as the agreement. In it, he acknowledges receipt of the funds from Eleanor Hayes and agrees to the terms of the share transfer. It is undeniable." I sat still, saying nothing more. The evidence spoke for me. Clara whispered, almost hopelessly, "No, it can't be. Father would never—" Margaret closed the file, her voice firm. "Your father did, Clara, and he left all the evidence behind. What you refuse to accept is the truth that he never walked this path alone. The woman you scorned is the very person who holds more than half of this family's fortune." The room grew heavy. Victor sat in stunned silence, his eyes fixed on the table. Clara was trembling, her nails digging so deeply into her palms that they drew blood, yet she didn't dare move. Tom glanced at me for a moment, his eyes a mixture of astonishment and admiration, before he looked down again, terrified of the storm that was brewing. I placed my hand on the file before me, my voice low and steady. "You thought all I knew was how to make soup. But soup isn't just food. It was my way of keeping this family alive when everything was falling apart. And while you were laughing at me, I was saving the very empire your father built." Clara shot to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. "No, you lied. You're just a wife." Margaret calmly replied. "A wife who holds 52% of the company's shares. As of today, Eleanor Hayes is the majority shareholder of Hayes & Coming. That is a legally recognized fact." The shouting and gasping breaths faded into silence. I sat there, not triumphant, not defensive, simply letting the truth do its work. In that elegant room, for the first time, power had returned to its rightful place. The air in the room was still thick after the revelation of the shares. Clara stood frozen, her eyes red, while Victor sat rigid as if he had just been sentenced. But Margaret wasn't finished. She opened a second file and placed it squarely in front of her. Her voice rang out, decisive and clear. "And this is the business plan from 2003, submitted alongside the stock agreement. This was the very framework that saved Hayes & Company from bankruptcy after the tech bubble burst in the early 2000s. Clara let out a scream, as if trying to tear the air apart. "No! That was my father's genius! It couldn't have been hers!" I looked directly at my daughter, my gaze not filled with anger, but with a profound stillness. "Your father had vision. But the numbers, the spreadsheets, the contingency plans, I wrote them all, night after night, when this house was dark, and the only sound was the ticking of the clock." Margaret pulled out a few old pages from the file. The paper yellowed, its edges stained with faint coffee marks. She pointed to the bottom right corner of a page. "The handwriting here belongs to Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. I have had it independently verified by a forensic analyst. There is no mistake." Victor gritted his teeth, his voice hoarse. "She only makes soup. She couldn't have written a strategic business plan." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, but every word landed like a hammer blow. "You're right. I made soup to keep this family alive. But when the company was on the brink of collapse, I was also the one who wrote every capital-raising plan, every cost-cutting roadmap, every strategy for expanding into the Asian market. He had the dream, I had the numbers, and because of that, the company is still here today." The room fell silent again, this time not from shock, but from a truth too obvious to deny. Clara trembled, her arrogant facade completely gone. She stammered, "No, it can't be. Father never said." Margaret closed the file, her voice firm. "Mr. Richard Hayes didn't say anything because he knew that one day the truth would speak for itself, and today that day has come." Tom finally lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. For the first time in so long he spoke, his voice choked with emotion. "Mother, was it you who saved us?" I looked at my son and nodded gently. "I never needed credit. I only needed this family to stand strong. But I never imagined that you, my own children, would forget that truth and turn me into a shadow in my own home." Clara suddenly screamed, her hands flailing wildly. "No, this is all a lie! You're trying to steal what Father left for us." I raised my head, my voice calm to the point of being chilling. "Clara, your father built an empire, but that empire once teetered on the edge of ruin. If not for my hand holding it back from the abyss, you would have nothing to fight over today." Victor slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking through the room. "You think you can change everything with a few old, tattered pieces of paper?" Margaret immediately retorted, her tone sharp. "Not just a few pieces of paper. This is the plan that was submitted with the bank loan application, bearing their official stamp. This is not just a memory, it is legal evidence." I took a deep breath, then enunciated each word clearly. "You can deny my work, but you cannot deny the numbers that saved your very lives." Clara seemed to be in a trance, stumbling back a few steps, muttering, No, you're just a wife, just a woman who makes soup." I looked at my daughter, a pang of sorrow in my heart, but I could not back down. I let my voice ring out like a final clean cut. And it was a wife, a woman who makes soup, who kept this empire from turning to ash. The room was utterly silent. No more sneers, no more arrogance. Only the stark truth, hanging in the air like a mirror reflecting it all. Margaret closed the final file, concluding with one short, powerful sentence. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes was not only the majority shareholder, but also the silent architect of its survival. This was legally established in 2003, and today it has been read aloud for all to hear. In that moment, I knew that anyone watching this story would be holding their breath. A double twist, not just ownership, but intellect, and nothing could ever silence the truth again. The atmosphere in this conference room seemed to detonate after Margaret's final affirmation. I sat there, silent, observing each face. Clara suddenly shrieked, her voice so shrill it startled everyone. "You stole my father's legacy! You stole our legacy!" She lunged toward the table, her trembling hands striking the file as if to tear it apart. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild, her entire body shaking with rage. Victor quickly grabbed her arm, trying to force her back into her chair. He growled, "Calm down, Clara. Screaming won't change anything. We'll take this to court. I'll hire another lawyer, drag her into the light, expose everything." Victor's voice was full of hatred, but I detected the tremor beneath it. He was no longer certain, no longer possessed his initial arrogance. Tom, who had been silent until now, finally uttered a few words. He stammered, his voice as soft as a whisper. I didn't know. Mother, I had no idea." His words brought a momentary hush to the room. I looked at my son and saw in his eyes a mixture of confusion and remorse. Clara immediately spun on Tom, her voice a shrill hiss, emphasizing every word. "Shut up. You've always been weak, always running away. Without me, you'd be nothing." Tom bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. My heart ached for him, but I didn't intervene. It was time for the truth to unfold on its own. Clara turned back to me, panting, her voice raw. "You were just a shadow. What are you trying to prove? That Father needed you? That you were more brilliant than him all along? You're wrong. Father was perfect, and you just tagged along." I took a deep breath and looked my daughter straight in the eye. My voice was low and steady, each word resonating in the room. "It's your obsession with perfection that blinded you, Clara. You saw your father as a god and everyone else as nothing. And that is why you have lost. You have lost everything. Not because I took it from you, but because you refused to look at the truth." The room was utterly still. Clara froze, her eyes glistening as if my words were a physical blow to her blind faith. Victor tried to pull Clara from her chair. "Let's go. We won't let this stand. I'll hire the best legal team. She can't win forever." Clara screamed in desperation. "No, I'm not leaving. I have to prove she's wrong. I have to take it all back." Margaret interjected calmly, her voice sharp as ice. "You can go to court, but this evidence will follow you everywhere. The more you try to deny it, the more you will only expose the truth." Clara trembled, her bloodshot eyes fixed on me. I saw in that gaze both hatred and helplessness. Tom spoke softly, his voice clearer and stronger this time. "I was blind, Mom. I was too afraid to see it. But now, I do." "You weren't just standing behind him. You were the one holding it all up." Tom's words were another knife twisting into Clara. She choked out a cry. "Betrayal! All of you have betrayed me!" I looked at my daughter, my heart aching, but my voice remained calm and cold. "No one betrayed you, Clara. You betrayed yourself. You let arrogance and your obsession with perfection consume your heart, and for that, you have lost." Clara's shoulders slumped, her body trembling uncontrollably. Victor held her hand tightly, but it was clear that his own eyes were filled with fear. Their wall of arrogance had crumbled right there in the middle of that room. I sat still, not smiling, not gloating. I just let the truth shine, allowing them to see themselves in its reflection. And anyone listening to this story would feel a shiver run down their spine, because this was no longer an argument. This was the moment the villains disintegrated under the weight of their own mistakes. The air in the conference room was so heavy, it felt as if the whole of San Francisco had stopped breathing. I sat with my back straight, my eyes fixed on the file on the table. The echoes of screams, accusations, and the sound of fists hitting wood from Clara and Victor still hung in the air. But now, it was time for the final judgment. Margaret stood, her voice resonating, clear and precise with every word. Based on the 2003 agreement and its accompanying documents, in conjunction with the final legal will of Mr. Richard Hayes, the entire estate, valued at over $100 million, including the controlling shares in Hayes & Company real estate and all related assets, is awarded to Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. Each word was like a lightning strike to Clara and Victor. Clara slumped into her chair, her eyes red, her lips trembling. Victor froze, his face ashen, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew this was the end of his illusions of power and his hidden ambitions. Margaret continued, slowly but with authority. However, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, as the sole heir, has requested that an additional decision regarding the distribution of assets, as determined by her, be read. I nodded. My voice rang out, unwavering and steady. I will not keep everything for myself. This empire was not just mine, nor was it just Richard's. It is the legacy of the Hayes family, but justice will never allow the arrogant or the greedy to destroy it. I turned to Tom. You will receive a small portion, not much, but enough for you to rebuild yourself. You have been weak for too long, Tom. This is your chance to stand up, to learn responsibility, and to become the man you were meant to be. Tom looked up, his eyes wet with tears, and choked out, Thank you, Mom. I promise I won't let you down. Then I turned to Clara. My daughter's eyes stared back at me, filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. I could see bitter tears streaming down her cheeks. I spoke clearly, each word etched into the air. You will also receive a portion, smaller than Tom's. Not because I don't love you, but because I want you to learn what responsibility means. Wealth is not a weapon to trample on others. It is a burden, and it is a duty. If you do not change, that inheritance will only become the chains that drag you down. Clara gritted her teeth, her voice hoarse. You're punishing me, I replied, my gaze firm. No, Clara. This is your final chance to learn the true value of life. If you see this as punishment, then you have already imprisoned yourself in the chains of your own pride. Victor shot to his feet, slamming his hands on the table. What about me? I am a son-in-law in this family. I've been here for 15 years. I deserve a share. Margaret cut him off, her voice cold. Mr. Victor, the law recognizes no claim for you. And furthermore, she paused, glancing at me. I nodded. Margaret produced another file. Your creditors have filed a petition with the court. Your debts have been verified. With today's outcome, not only will you receive no assets from the Hayes family, but you will now face a civil lawsuit from the bank. Victor staggered back, as if he had been physically struck, collapsing into his chair. His face was contorted, all his bravado gone. The final curtain of arrogance had fallen, revealing a broken, cornered, and defeated man. Clara looked at her husband, then at me, tears streaming down her face. But this time, there were no screams, no cruel words, only silence and an overwhelming, bitter sorrow. I stood up, my voice filling the room. Justice does not always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from the truth being brought into the light. Today, I did not need to defeat anyone. I only needed to reclaim what was rightfully mine and to pass it on in the fairest way possible. This empire, whether it is 100 million or 1 billion, is nothing but numbers if no one understands the true value of family. No one responded. There was only silence, as if my words had pinned them all in place. I turned and left the conference room, feeling their eyes on my back. Clara was silent, her tears falling. Victor had his head buried in his hands. Tom stood up and followed a few steps behind me, not to hide in my shadow, but to walk like a man ready to learn how to carry his own weight. Justice had been served, not with noise, not with revenge, but with truth and with grace. The launch of the Hayes Foundation took place in a grand ballroom in downtown San Francisco. Bright yellow lights shone down on an audience filled with women, young, old, and middle-aged, all with expectant eyes. A wave of applause erupted as I stepped onto the stage, a microphone in my hand. There was no more trembling, No more pain, only the quiet composure of someone who had weathered the storm and remained standing. I took a deep breath, and my voice rang out, clear and strong. They used to say I was just a wife. They laughed when I made soup, and they looked down on me as I worked quietly in the shadows. But sometimes, a wife is the very reason an entire empire survives and stands tall. The ballroom fell silent for a moment, then burst into a sustained, thunderous applause. I continued, my words resonating, as if to etch them into the minds of everyone present. Today, the Hayes Foundation is being established to support women who have had to put their dreams on hold, to give up their careers to care for their families. I want to give them a chance to return, to prove that they are not just the support system, but that they can be the pillars, the creators, and the inspiration for generations to come. The camera panned across the faces of women with tears in their eyes, their expressions shining with pride. Among them, some clasped each other's hands, whispering, "Finally, someone is speaking for us." In a distant corner, behind the ballroom doors, I caught a glimpse of Clara. She stood there in a long coat, her eyes red-rimmed. There were no more screams, no more bitter words, only a quiet, suffocating sorrow as she watched me from afar. Her eyes trembled, as if she had realized too late that her arrogance had led her to ruin, while I, the woman she had scorned, stood on the highest stage, not through power, but through recognition and respect. I didn't stop there. I went on, my voice firm but full of grace. This foundation is not just about money. It is a testament that every sacrifice has value. I seek no revenge. I want no one to kneel. I only want to leave behind a true legacy, a legacy of justice, humanity, and wisdom. This time, the entire hall rose to their feet. The applause was like thunder, their eyes blazing with belief. I looked down and saw in every face a reflection of myself during those long, quiet years of being dismissed and pushed to the side, and now all of them had a voice. I bowed my head in thanks and left the stage. As I stepped outside, the San Francisco breeze was gentle, the scent of the sea filling my lungs. I didn't look back, didn't search for Clara, didn't linger on her bitter gaze. I just walked away, serene, as if I had finally let it all go. There was no triumph in my heart, only a profound sense of peace, a sweet aftertaste. I knew that the audience following this story would not only see justice served, but would also carry away a message. Never underestimate the value of a silent sacrifice, for it may be the very thing that holds an empire together through the storm. I left the ballroom, the sunlight stretching out on the road before me. My steps were light, peaceful. Behind me, the applause and cheers still echoed, but I had left it all behind. I was walking away, not in search of victory, but to begin a new journey, a journey of planting seeds for other women. That was the true legacy, and I smiled, at peace, because I knew that justice and humanity had finally found their place.